Greetings and salutations, people of the internet. Austin here. Welcome back to the channel, especially after my brief hiatus in July for my birthday, and more time to work on this absolute monster of a video. Last time, if y'all recall, we went over the expansion to the OG Xenia region with Pokemon Legends Carthnew. Before we get into today's breakdown proper, we have some housekeeping for this video and all future region reboots. After I did a poll on here and Twitter, before I left that hellscape, I decided to make the timestamps for my upcoming videos a bit more in-depth. For all region reboots going forward, aside from the usual timestamps you see in my other videos, I will be pinpointing all of the newly added Pokemon in the reboot so people can skip around to those if they're not interested in looking at the returning fakemon. This is how it will work. I will timestamp the new Pokemon in their own section if they don't fall under one of the other pre-existing categories. For example, if I introduce a new evolution in a region reboot, it will go under the new evolutions section as opposed to the new Pokemon tab. Got it? Good. Without further ado, I welcome you back to the Kyria Preserve with all the new and familiar faces that await you inside. Let's begin. Reboot, the charging Pokemon. Our grass starter here barely changed from the OG version, easily changing the least out of the base stage starters. Firstly, I altered the proportions to feel a bit more startery with a bigger head, shorter tail, and thicker hooves. I also made the horn a touch bigger to break up the silhouette just a bit more. The biggest change to this Pokemon came with the shiny, since the OG was hot garbage. I mainly replaced the pale green of the original with the blue you see here for a more dynamic shiny. A solid update overall, probably the easiest of the bunch, followed by Caterize. Rystone, the Rockhorn Pokemon. The biggest change of the redesign came with the color palette, mainly with the light green accent of the original. The OG's color palette was so underwhelming and didn't have nearly enough contrast. So, I added the new shade of green to stand out against the rest of the palette. Outside of that, I made the rock on its back a bit taller, made the ears bigger, and finally fixed the feet positions and perspective, which was easily the biggest fumble of the original. I also made the entire line as a whole fatter, giving it some much needed visual bulk for a rhinoceros. The shiny got a bit of an overhaul. Iffy on how it came out now, to be honest. I definitely would have done some things differently now. Ryskewer, the Stone Spear Pokemon. This and Crust Ashen are in contention for the biggest glow-up of the reboot's final starters. Actually, scratch that. This is the bigger glow-up since it needed it more. Like I said earlier, I made this Pokemon overall thicker. I repositioned the legs so they felt more balanced and proportional. I removed the light brown from the OG's design and replaced it with the orange so it stood out against the earthy color scheme better. I just combined the rock horns on the face as one solid piece over the nose, just for simplicity, and to help the reworked face flow a bit better, mainly just fixing the eye placements there. I made the tail a touch shorter. It didn't need to be that long in the original, so a little bit of length got trimmed off there. I fixed the proportions and perspective of the giant rock spike on its back, making it a lot bigger for a better silhouette and just making the design more fearsome. For those who actually remember, I replaced Huge Power with Sheer Force in the reboot, since on reflection, it was kind of insane to give a starter Huge Power for the hidden ability. The shiny isn't too different, just added the pink and adjusted some of the saturations to the other colors. Categorize, the devilish Pokemon. This one didn't change a whole lot outside of the palette and the overall chin. I darkened the color since they were too muted in the original, mainly the central red fur. I combined the eyes and the eyebrows into one so there was more breathing room on the face, while also changing the pupils to a nice purple color for some more contrast. I made the furry cheeks actually flow properly instead of just being off-balanced size-wise. I also made the fur bow on the back a bit bigger, but not by much. Lastly, I made the end of the tail more jagged for a more interesting look. This just changed barely more than Reboot. Fiendline, the Inferno Cat Pokemon. Honestly, this changed the least out of the middle stages easily. I flipped the design for one, mainly just to iron out the kinks, but I liked how it looked from this shot. I reworked the saturation levels of the fur once again so it wasn't so muted. I made the tail more jagged to feel like a flame and keeping that consistent with Categorized. Not to mention doing the so with the inside pattern along the tail. I tweaked the black fur cape here and there. Not too much, just adjusting how many curved spikes there was so it wasn't overly busy. Oh, I neglected to mention it with Categorize, but I completely redid the shinies for the entire line, replacing the dull brown and gray with the vibrant pink and blue you see now. So much happier with these shinies, oh my god. Lucifer, the Dark King Pokemon. This changed the least out of the final starters, but the changes that are there feel more significant somehow. I reworked the color balance, mainly in the face, thanks to the purple eyes, and I just flat out removed the gray from the OG version's palette since it was just getting way too busy. I fixed the flame render on the head and added a flame on the outstretched paw on the back. I changed the shape of the fur cape near the back to the giant curved up spikes just to break things up and make it stand out more when compared to Fiend lines. I made the bulk of the tail thinner so the devil tail at the end felt more impactful. Lastly, I made the mustache a little bit bigger so it stood out against the face, especially with the new yellow coloration there. This is still my favorite starter of the trio, but there is no longer a wide gap in quality between the three of them. Like in the OG version, this is the first member of my in-game team. Pretension, the eye-catching Pokemon. This easily had the biggest glow-up of the base starters, even if it didn't change too much, all things considered. I made this Pokemon blockier overall, and I squashed the body by a smidge. I made the claws a touch longer and repositioned the one in front for a more dynamic pose. I simplified the eyebrows and shrank them while I was at it. I rounded off the mouth to give it more of a cutesy look and keep the overall shape language more consistent. The shiny also got an update, swapping out the original green with a darker blue and replacing the blue with the seaweed green. Basically just a color swap more or less. Shiration, the Pom-Pom Pokemon. Now this got a major overhaul, easily getting the biggest change out of the middle stages. I made the main body a lot thinner to feel more like a middle stage. I raised the eye stalk so it had a clearer silhouette. I simplified the coral pom-poms along with the patterns on the arms. Same thing with the legs for that matter. The original was just way too busy in that regard. The pose, however, got the biggest upgrade, giving it more of a dynamic flair and just giving it so much more personality and character. The shiny didn't change this time around. It was fine as is, outside of just some minor saturation issues. Crustacean, the model Pokemon. I mainly changed this to be more of a 3/4 view, which was the biggest blunder of the OG's version being a straight-on view. Like with Pretension, I slimmed down the torso and made the lower body a bit bigger, giving it more of a silhouette and just some more interesting proportions, comparatively anyway. I tweaked the colors here and there, mainly the shade of pink used for the body and the shade used for the seaweed decorations. I raised the eye stalks once again, but it's not as noticeable with Pretension. I slightly reposed the arm in front just to mix up the perspectives for some better variety. I have the least to say about this one, if only because the original wasn't too bad. Overall, I think these starters came out fantastically in the reboot. Now one of my stronger trios. Toxound, the Muscadog Pokemon. Proportion changes were the name of the game with this redesign for this little bush dog, mainly giving it an actual neck. I changed the shape of the feet to give it visible paws instead of just the weird tree trunk legs it had previously. I made the tail longer, and I also changed the shape of the mouth, giving it actual teeth instead of just the jagged flesh mouth it had previously. I slightly changed the ear shape as well, adding some minor details on the inside of the ear, but nothing major there. The colors got way more vibrant in the reboot, mainly with the brown on the body. The OG was way too washed out for my liking. Most of the Preserve honestly falls under that category. Anyway, but the changes here pale in comparison to the evolutions. Musclaw, the Toxic Slash Pokemon. Okay, let's get the comparatively minor things out of the way first. I made this Pokemon more of a 3/4 view since the original was just a full-on profile view and I just didn't like how it looked. I drastically changed the color scheme, removing a lot of the patterns on the body as to not overcomplicate the new design, mainly on the legs and face. I made this guy a lot more top-heavy with a much bigger torso and front legs, making the back one smaller by comparison. I made the tail longer once again, but I gave it more of a curve so it doesn't appear as drastic as it did with Toxound. Now for the big change. I covered the head and back of this Pokemon in congealed poison. It was actually a suggestion sent to me while I was brainstorming on the redesign. I liked it enough to give it a shot, and the rest was history. I love how the render on the poison came out. It gave this such a unique look among my other poison-type Pokemon. So good. Burrowworm, the Ambush Worm Pokemon. This didn't change a whole lot in hindsight, just simplifying it down to feel more like a first-stage Pokemon. I shrank the body a bit, just removing one of the torsos, and making the spike at the end slightly bigger. I full-on removed the spikes from the collar, it just cluttered it too much, and it just looked awful. I made the eyebrows a bit bigger, and that was about it. This little tiger beetle larva was a solid design from jump, it just needed another pass. God, I am going to be saying some variation of this so many times in this script, I just know it. Kinda tempted to make a counter for it. Petal, the Steel Cocoon Pokemon. Now this got a major redesign, a much needed one at that. I combined the green sections of the body for a more coherent color, massively slimming it down in the process. I also added some touch of green to the face for some better color balancing, while replacing the eye color with the magenta you see here. I changed the shape of the head, curved the eyebrows to help it flow better with the new head shape as well. I cut down on the number of spikes on the back, making them slightly bigger to compensate for that. Lastly, I add some more details on the body with the torso, just to make it feel more cocoony. I'm really happy I did so. Now this feels like a proper cocoon Pokemon. The shiny had to be changed ASAP, replacing the ugly yellow and blue color scheme with the dark blue and pink here. Sindalloy, the Iron Knight Pokemon. Once again, this didn't need to change too much, at least in the upper body. I did make the torso a little bit thicker to feel more powerful, alongside making the head a touch smaller. The legs got the bulk of the changes. I made them a lot thicker to support the weight, and I also repositioned them to make them make more sense as a buggy centaur. I added the orange to the back of the legs for some color balancing and to just break up the design in general. Lastly, I added the red spots to the thorax just to keep that pattern going. I also changed the shiny for this Pokemon, essentially giving it Legipillar's color scheme from the Nacton region. I really love the gold on this Pokemon. It makes the metallic texture sing. Oh, this is one of the best renders in the region. Thunderbolt, the Lightning Beak Pokemon. This was easily one of the weakest designed lines in the entire preserve, if not the weakest in the OG version. I had to really lock in to fix this Pokemon's whack-ass design. So I made the body smaller and a bit more square, with the tail feathers now not connected to the body as one piece. I straightened out the beak, making it a touch smaller in the process, but made the eyes a lot bigger and just more adorable. I made the legs a bit bigger so they could actually sit down on objects, and it just helped with the overall proportions of the body. The wings are roughly the same size, I just changed the shape. The colors had to get a serious overhaul, replacing the ugly green with the dark blue from Vikavolt and using the light blue and green accents to break it up. The amount of yellow stayed the same overall. This is such a better design, and the evolution got an even better glow up. Wizzap, the Lightning Beak Pokemon. I did a near complete redesign for this Pokemon, with the original being an abject failure. I based the new design off of a violet saber-wing hummingbird after someone suggested the species to me. The electricity wings from the OG region were a neat idea, but they looked awful in execution, so I replaced them with regular flesh and blood wings. I completely removed the orange and green from the color scheme. I streamlined the head, made the tail feathers a lot longer, and I changed the shape of the beak. I gave it the blue-green eyes since I just thought it looked pretty. This is such a night and day difference between the two versions. I am so happy with how this Pokemon came out, even if I didn't have as much to say as I did with Thunderbolt. Kyria Preserve, the long-leg Pokemon. I mainly wanted to focus on fixing the numerous perspective issues that plagued the OG version, mostly with the thorax. So I tweaked that first and angled the pattern on the back afterwards to better fit the new angle with some tweaking via the transform tool. Other than that, I made the orange more vibrant, and the rest of the color scheme was honestly fine as it was. I spread the back legs out a bit more, and the rest was history. All in all, a very simple fix. The original wasn't too bad, all things considered, so I'm happy I had an easy time with this Pokemon. Tressfang, the Skull Spider Pokemon. I did have to change a bit more with this one compared to Ariados, but it wasn't too bad, all things considered. I made the purple more vibrant since the OG was a bit too dull, and I darkened the red by a bit so it stood out more. Made the eyes on the cow skull abdomen bigger, shrinking some of the other parts of the pattern to make more space. I also made said skull one giant piece, mainly just by combining the horns as a part of the abdomen, opposed to them being visually their own separate part with a line. Mainly just to differentiate it from Ushipaida a bit more. I made the horns of the skull and the pedipalps more jagged and angular to feel more dangerous. This is still a very simple but very effective regional evolution. Obaseed, the Rock Seed Pokemon. Another simple but needed update. I mainly had to fix the saturation of the entire color scheme. The palette was way too dull. So I replaced the central pale green with the darker one to make it really stand out. I made the shell this Pokemon is wearing a bit wider for a better silhouette, alongside making the flowers on top a bit bigger. Lastly, I made the eyes more defined since the originals didn't have enough personality going on, so I updated it to give it the barest more emotion. Everything I said about the base color scheme applies to the shiny as well, just too damn muted. Obaspike, the Thorn Tower Pokemon. The first change I wanted to make with this Pokemon was with the legs. The original's perspective and anatomy didn't work, so I made it a point to fix that first. Only the red needed some alterations in terms of the color scheme, just making it darker to stand out better. I did make the stem on top a lot bigger, same with the spikes on the side of the body. Aside from a different perspective for the planter that makes up this Pokemon's lower body, the rest of the design really didn't change. I did change the shiny, though. I don't know if I prefer the originals more or not after a second look. Anyway, a simple change for a simple Pokemon. Purse Soul, the handbag Pokemon. Alright, the first of many new Pokemon added to the preserve. This walking purse is based on crocodile skin handbags. Like with a lot of my Pokemon, the first sketch got this down pretty damn perfectly. The first major thing I had to do were change the eyes. I didn't like the originals, so they had to go. They were just too creepy, for lack of a better word. And not the good kind of creepy either. I had to go back and add more brown to the design to help break up the green, mainly along the top of the tail and the handles on top. Like the tour system from the Ankuv region, I love the zipper mouth and tongue. That's just a design convention I like a lot. I created accessorized to boost the effectiveness of certain items, and I felt it worked thematically for a purse Pokemon. Full Canine, the accordion Pokemon. Back-to-back new Pokemon. This was a suggestion too good not to use. Naturally, this is based on accordions, polka music, and dachshunds. This is easily one of my favorite new Pokemon added to the preserve. They're just so cute! Before anyone asks, yes, Slinky from Toy Story was an inspiration for the design. In terms of changes from the base sketch, I made the paws a bit more defined with the white at the bottom, added the spotted brown near the tail, and it was good from there. I really love the keyboard ear pattern. I think that's the most clever design element for this little pupper. Yes, this would be Weird Al's partner Pokemon. Fun fact, when it opens its mouth, music/barks comes out when it walks. This is the first of many new sound-type Pokemon to come out in this region reboot. Sherbet, the tiny Pokemon. Our tiny butler here had a fair bit of changes from the original, mainly in terms of proportions. I made the upper body a lot bigger, mainly to help translate into the evolution easier. I made the legs a bit smaller so the upper body felt a little bit more imposing, and I just felt the original proportions just looked a smidgen awkward. I completely changed the perspective of the face, giving it more of a profile view, and I massively increased the size of the hair for a better silhouette, since the OG's was just kind of lacking in that regard. Honestly, I did the same with the perspective of the torso as well, at least when it comes to the patterning. Anyway, I did touch up the shiny as well, mainly just swapping the placement of the existing colors around and just upping the saturation of the existing red. Arthro Punch, the bodyguard Pokemon. The evolution method via Combat Stone is still the same. I know I don't have to reiterate the existing evolution methods, but it's been a long time since the OG Kyria Preserve breakdown, so I felt a refresher might be nice for some of y'all. This didn't change nearly as much as Sherbet did. I mainly just updated the colors and the legs. I made the legs a lot thicker to support the weight and adjusted the perspective on the front leg to make the design feel a bit more balanced looking. In terms of the colors, I made them a lot darker since the original palette was very washed out. Mainly with the purple. I did remove the orange from the palette since it was just getting too busy and I wanted a cleaner design. Not a huge update, but an effective one. Borurashi, the Thunderquill Pokemon. Now this got a huge update, which is very much needed. If y'all don't recall, the original version of this Pokemon was my least favorite Pika clone in my entire catalog by a country mile. The pose was boring, it had no interesting concept, and it just looks terrible. I wanted to give this Pokemon more to work with and have an actual concept around it. I knew I wanted to make it a quadruped to set it apart from the others, but adding the rose was a suggestion given during a brainstorming session. I added the lore of bug types being attracted to the rose, so it developed electric quills to defend itself alongside its new surly personality. I felt having a grouchy Pika clone was a nice change of pace. outside of Morpeko's hangry mode, anyway. The design was pretty much done with the first pass. I only had to shift around a few of the colors during development, and it was done. The shiny colors are the same. I didn't feel the need to change them. This is now no longer the worst Pika clone in my catalog. Patron Lizard, the arrogant lizard Pokemon. Oh boy, did this redesign need to happen. The original had a good concept for the pose, but the execution was booty cheeks. I gave it a bigger upper body with a more defined back of the head leading into the neck. I changed the angle of the head downwards while still giving it that classic holier-than-thou expression. The colors got a major revamp as I made the central green of the body a lot lighter and made the bluish purple a lot darker for more contrast. I gave the Pokemon a little bit more of a chest and underbelly since it looked a little too skinny to support itself naturally, and I just thought it made for a better design. As drastic a change as this one, I think the evolution got even more love in that department. Drag Arrogant, the Sky Lord Pokemon. The Sky Stone Evo method hasn't changed at all, so that's still consistent. I generally try not to change evolution methods unless they're for a specific purpose, but I digress. I streamlined the hell out of this Pokemon, removing a lot of the unnecessary details as to not overclutter the design, mainly in the wing membrane. I fixed the perspective of the body, especially with the arms and the wing membrane meeting the side of the torso. I made the tail a lot bigger and added a third fin there to help it steer itself in the air better like a plane rudder. I changed nearly all the patterns on the body, either removing them entirely or just combining them together. I removed the cuffs on the arms and added the gloves going up to the elbow. I made the helmet cover the entire top of the head as opposed to just being limited to the eyes and eyebrows. I made the legs a bit bigger so they could actually function when not flying. Lastly, I did change up the shiny to better fit the new color scheme layout. I removed the highlighter yellow with the light orange on the accents of the wings and fins. I swapped out the pink of the underbelly for the purplish red we have now. I am really happy with this redesign. Athnosian Voltorb, the Crystal Ball Pokemon. This regional variant changed more than I thought upon a second look. I simplified the hell out of this Pokemon, removing 2 of the golden bands around the lower body and just having the 1 band separating the top and bottom halves. I recolored the glass dome just so it read easier as glass upon a first glance. Lastly, I toned down the amount of flowy psychic energy inside the Pokemon, mainly just removing the light blue from the coloration and added the sick glow effect to make it feel more mystical. This is probably the simplest Pokemon in the entire preserve, and that's all it needs to be. Sometimes I have to force myself to remember that less is more in some cases. Luckily, Electrode got more than a few changes in its redesign, so I have something to talk about. Athnosian Electrode, the Crystal Ball Pokemon. I brought back the golden bands from Voltorb to give this Pokemon some serious eyebrows, and it still looked like the luxury ball inspiration. Upon a great suggestion given to me, I had this Pokemon ride on a Nimbus cloud of its own psychic energy to fly around the region. It's a brainstorm. I'll see myself out. Because of this, I decided to give it Levitate in place of Forewarn. My favorite design detail about the cloud is having the pink energy flowing out of the center look like lightning bolts. I just thought that was clever. I also made this Pokemon angrier in the reboot since it is constantly stressed out about getting eaten by other Psychic-type Pokemon. Lastly, I fixed the horrible render on the glass covering the energy inside of the body, being the major flaw of the OG design. Now this is an infinitely more interesting regional variant. Stizzle, the Pepper Stinger Pokemon. This new addition to the preserve is a basic-ass concept I've been meaning to do for a while. A Scorpion Pepper. Yeah, I know, not the most original idea, but I wanted to try my hand at it. In terms of the original design, only the eyes had to change from the base sketch. They were originally just white pupils, but I wasn't satisfied, so I went with the trio of pupils in each eye you see here. Pun intended. This is one of the most unique sets of eyes I've ever done, and I'm so happy I did this. The colors took me a few passes to get right, mainly the balance of the lighter green against the rest of the palette. The first pass of the colors had too much orange for my liking, so I had to tone that down. Picante was too perfect not to use as an ability, though I'm not sure if I'll ever give another Pokemon this ability. Food for thought. Watch as I say that I'll find a new Pokemon to use for it while I'm working on this video. A simple Pokemon done very well, in my opinion. Crabrate, the Titan Chop Pokemon. Oh boy. After looking back on the OG version of the Preserve and a lot of my other regions, I came to an annoying realization. Almost every crab Pokemon I have is a damn Fiddler Crab. Since this was already my least favorite evolution of the OG Preserve, I decided to give it a complete near redesign. I kept the karate theming and the evolution via Waterstone, but this Pokemon is now based on the Heikengami, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, aka Samurai Crabs. Oh, before I forget, since I never explained why they're in the Preserve, they're native to the Kyria region itself. Anywho, I massively bulked up the upper body to play into their lore and give this Pokemon a little bit more of an interesting body plan. Added the face on its back, which took a few tries to get the right look down. I combined the lower jaw and the black belts this Pokemon is wearing just to simplify the design. The perspective of the new arms took me a while to iron out. That was easily the hardest thing about the design outside of the face on the back. I love how this redesign came out. Easily one of the strongest evolutions introduced now in the Preserve. Bantang, the War Elephant Pokemon. I tweaked the evolution method for this Pokemon a bit, as it now evolves once given a metal coat while it knows rollout. This Pokemon got a huge overall redesign while still keeping the tank and war elephant theme going. Iron Treads and Great Tusks were a huge help in redesigning this Pokemon since they were exactly what I needed with the tank theme. Firstly, I got rid of the shield ears and brought something closer to Donphan's ears while still keeping one of the spikes on the outside. I fixed the leg perspective and positioning, that being my main issue with the OG design of this Pokemon. I changed up the tusks and separated them from the armor/tank tread on the back. We'll get to that in a sec, I promise. I added some mud splatter across the body for a nice pattern and to help break up the colors. Now for the big one. The tank tread trunk/cannon got a major change. I combined the cannon trunk and tread across the back for a more seamless transition when this Pokemon rolls on the ground. I also helped simplify the head region by not having a separate armored helmet covering the face. This is head and shoulders superior to the original, and it remains in its place as the second member of my in-game team. Minifang, the tiny deer Pokemon. Alright, this little guy. Been waiting to talk about this line, mainly the evolution, but we'll get there. For starters, I gave this Pokemon more of an actual neck for a better silhouette. I made the head a tiny bit smaller, mainly in the snout region, and I tweaked the perspective for a simpler design. I made the orange a bit brighter, but overall the colors and patterns remained the same. Lastly, I fixed the horrible legs this Pokemon originally had, giving them some much needed bulk and correct anatomy. Oh, I also shrank the torso a bit, but that goes hand in hand with the legs in my eyes. Now, let's talk about the main event of this line. Vampire, the Fang Deer Pokemon. Arguably the most drastic redesign in the entire Preserve. I also tweaked the evolution method with this monster, now requiring exposure to a dusk stone at night. So, if you don't recall my rant about this Pokemon in the OG Preserve breakdown, let me remind y'all of this. I was, and still am, sick of doing Dracula for all of my vampire Pokemon. I overdid it, and I got sick of looking at it. Just like doing my army camo patterns. So I wanted to really change up this design, so I decided to look at one of my favorite vampire movies for inspiration, 30 Days of Night. I wanted a more monstrous design, so I went with something closer to a Wendigo in terms of a body plan. I made it a bipedal beast of a Pokemon with very long arms now ending in sharp claws. I completely changed the eye shape and color to what you see here to feel more soulless and empty. I toned down the amount of black on the color scheme as to not overcrowd the palette, keeping it mostly to the fur around the torso. I added purple to break things up, and I just thought it looked pretty. I mean, do I even need to explain why I created Bloodsucker as the new primary ability? Didn't think so. Easily in the top 5 redesigns of the Preserve. Cestadrain, the stomach bug Pokemon. After the novel I wrote about the last Pokemon, this is a breath of fresh air since it has barely changed at all. Most of the changes boil down to proportion alterations in the body. I shrank the main body down massively so that this had a bigger head and felt more like a first stage Pokemon. I reposed the body a bit, trying to give it a more dynamic pose, however minor that may be in hindsight. I did make the purple and green of the shiny a bit brighter since they kind of got lost in all the orange. Cestadrake, the evolution I added later in the Mihan region, would probably be in the Preserve, but the redesign will have to wait until the eventual Mihan reboot. Kyria Preserve, the flailing Pokemon. Okay, the next 2 breakdowns should be very short since they're essentially just redraws with better line work and rendering. The only minor change of that is I removed the outline of the pink face pattern. That's it. The rest of this Pokemon is more or less the same, just not completely shitty looking. I did change up the shiny just a tad, making the green and pinkish red a lot brighter since they kinda looked awful. Moving on. Kyria Beware, the strong-arm Pokemon. Great, I just noticed a typo in the Dex entry, and now that's gonna bug the hell out of me for this entire section. Wonderful. Since everything I did with Stuffle applies to this Pokemon, removing the line work around the patterns as well, I'm going to talk more about the confusing-ass lore surrounding this Pokemon, since there's nothing else to really talk about with the redesign itself. This is how the change to this Pokemon happened. Tourists to the Kyria region fell in love with Beware and Stuffle, overfed them with sweet berries and treats. They slowly changed over time into gummy bears you see here. Then, the few apex predators of the region went after them since they're delicious, so they were placed in the Preserve to keep them safe. Get it? Got it? Good. This is still the 3rd member of my in-game team. Sorry these 2 breakdowns were essentially a nothing burger. There's not much I could have done about that. Lullabindle, the babysitter Pokemon. This is one of the most unique Pokemon in the entire Preserve, possibly even my entire catalog. I base this line off of mutualism in nature, specifically tarantulas using frogs as babysitters against insects while acting as the frog's bodyguard. This took me so long to figure out. The first pass of this Pokemon was basically a normal-ass frog sitting on top of a giant egg sac. After I realized that was fucking stupid, I began experimenting with the tongue acting like a baby leash and a ball and chain. The next pass of the design brought in the tired expression and posture, really selling how overworked the little frog was. After that hurdle, it was relatively smooth sailing from there. The name was a suggestion from a buddy on the Subjectively Discord server. Spidiosis, the mutualism Pokemon. This evolves from Lullabindle once exposed to a hive stone and is now the other half of that mutualism relationship. Once this evolves, the mama spider allows the frog to finally rest in the hair on his thorax. The web hair is easily my favorite design element of the Pokemon. I think when it's combined with the expression, it adds a lot of character to the Pokemon. The legs were originally a lot more bare in terms of pattern and color, so I added the would-be orange sections near the heels to make them more dynamic. The colors were super easy since I already had the blueprint with Lullabundle. The first name I actually tried out was Tarantumama and Momtulism, but they didn't work out. Eventually, I landed on Spidiosis. I am so happy I did this line. It was super experimental, but so worth the hassle. Spoopup, the Misthound Pokemon. Most of the changes to this ghostly pupper came down to the proportions. I gave it a smaller body so it felt more like a first stage Pokemon, so I thickened up the legs to compensate for this. I simplified the raised up paw a tad from the OG pose, mainly just not having the paw bend backwards so much for a cleaner silhouette. I did change the shiny since the original was just too boring. I swapped out the light gray for the purple in place now. I also swapped out the bony tan color for black for a little bit more contrast. I created Fog Bank to play into this Pokemon's lore, and I don't play around with accuracy/evasion enough when it comes to abilities. Panown, the Ghost Stalker Pokemon. Okay, this changed a bit more than Spoopup. I made the ears bigger, raising up one of them in the process. Same with the collar and the tail. Oh, before I forget, for the entire line, I changed the outlines of the ectoplasmic sections to feel more ghosty. I don't want to repeat that in every entry, so I figured I'd knock it out here. I replaced the bone color for a stark white for more color contrast. I also gave this Pokemon a bit more of a neck, so the spooky collar on the head had more breathing room. The shiny changes carried over from Spoopup to this Pokemon, though I did make the blue a bit brighter to read easier. A solid all-around update. Basculhound, the Relentless Hunter Pokemon, one of the few Duskstone Evos for a Ghost type that I've done. This changed a fair amount. I made the torso longer to fix the anatomy issues plaguing the OG version, swapping out the colors once again for stark white. I completely removed the blue from the color scheme to simplify it, replacing it with the blue-green from the previous stages. I made the legs more defined shape-wise while still having them be made out of ectoplasm. I made the ears and tail a little bit longer and more wavy shape-wise, just for more interesting shapes to play around with. Not a whole lot to say with this Pokemon outside of those changes. This is essentially just a redraw. I almost considered this for my team, but I had to leave it off. Quackascon, the pouch parent Pokemon, our first proper convergent species of the Preserve. This is obviously based on Quackas and Kangaskhan. I didn't have too much of an issue when designing this Pokemon. I knew what I wanted overall with the line. The only thing I had to change from the base sketch was adding one of the ears back on the baby in the pouch. Something I forgot to draw on the first pass. Color-wise, I initially wanted to make this pink with light purple accents. After that failed, I tried purple for the main body, but it was way too saturated, so I had to fix that. Eventually, I settled on the color you see here for the bulk of the body. Trying to match the shading from Kangaskhan was a bit of a challenge, but it did overall work out in the end. Quokka Clan, the Pouch Family Pokemon. Naturally, I had to make an evolution based on Mega Kangaskhan. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. Drawing this was actually the easiest part of the entire process, since converting the Mega into a Convergent was fairly simple. No, the hard part came with the shading. Working with two Pokemon in one design took longer than I had expected. Accidentally shading on the wrong layer a few times didn't help either. But eventually I got it done and this Pokemon was good to go. I don't have much say with this line overall. I just think they're executed fairly well and I don't have any major issues with them in hindsight. Maybe better shinies, but that's just more of a nitpick on my part. Skip Pebble, the Joyful Rock Pokemon. I'm not going to waste your time and my vocal cords for this one too much, so let's just speedrun it. This is just a redraw of the OG design with a slightly brighter blue for the eyes and mouth, and an actual stone texture to help sell the design. I did change the shiny, flipping the color scheme and having the gray on the bottom, and replacing the darker gray with a Gigalith blue. Moving on. Aerostone, the water skimmer Pokemon. This is now a Skystone evolution. I hadn't done one in a while, so it felt fitting to bring it back with this guy. Now, this got some major changes, mostly in the pose and perspective departments. I flipped the perspective so we're actually seeing the underside of this Pokemon as opposed to seeing the top of them like in the OG version. Trying to look more dynamic and action-filled with this one. I made the energy tether bigger and brighter since it was lackluster in the original, let's be real. Adding another arc at the back for more implied movement. The biggest change came to the rock in the back now having arms. They were a last-minute addition to the line after a brainstorming session on Discord. The idea came from someone suggesting that the 3 rocks stack on top of each other like frogs when they're not moving. So the one in the back would throw the ones ahead of it to start off their momentum. I will say it does help the overall silhouette, so I'm happy I added it. This is a fairly good redesign. Not special, but good. Kyria Wingull, the seagull Pokemon. Again, not gonna waste your time here. This is nothing more than a simple redraw with a subtle texture added. Other than making the red a bit more vibrant, the orange of the shiny, there are no noticeable changes with this version. Let's just move on to Gullet. Gullet, the beach bully Pokemon. Now there are things I can actually talk about with this Pokemon. I changed the shape of the torso to be more ovalish. The original just didn't sit right with me on a second look. Plus, it makes this Pokemon look chunkier, so that's a plus. I made the wings a fair bit smaller, further selling the fluffiness of this giant beach rat. I replaced the pale black of the body with the gray from the first stage, since I just didn't like how that color scheme looked anymore. I made the accent colors, the red and yellow, a lot more vibrant to fix the contrast issue since they were just too muted. Lastly, I added a bib, for lack of a better word, over the neck and the top of the chest to break up the colors. A solid all-around update. Starzom, the Spirit Star Pokemon. Oh boy, did this one need some love. This split Evo for Staryu still evolves via Ectostone. That much hasn't changed. First thing I did in terms of changes was fixing the proportions of the central body of this Pokemon. I squared off the arms at the end, and I fixed how the body flowed, for lack of a better description. I cut down on the amount of purple across the body and made it darker for a lot better color contrast. I fixed the central disc and gem eye, both of which no longer looking like garbage like they did in the OG version. I made the ectoplasm arms a bit paler, and I added the 5th one at the bottom to balance out the design. I threw in some missing chunks of the body to further sell the zombie theme more, and that was pretty much it. The shiny needed to be changed. It was so underwhelming. I made it a sickly green, replacing the pale blue of the original, while making the gem and ectoplasm a bright magenta for contrast. This still isn't anything special design-wise, but it is a hell of a lot better now, I can tell you that much. Or Photon, the Abyss-like Pokemon. The first new cross-gen evolution added in the reboot, this evolves from Lantern once it's exposed to a Thunderstone. I based this behemoth off of an oarfish. I thought the animal's natural bioluminescence worked well with the rest of the pre-existing line, without just making a bigger anglerfish. Plus, the oarfish is just so fucking cool. So I just thought it worked out pretty well. This didn't need to change a whole lot from the first draft of the design, outside of the color scheme at least. Originally, the fin was a much brighter orange, the spots were a duller yellow, and the light blue here was a lot more muted. I went through so many colors, mainly with the fins, before I eventually settled on this color scheme. After a few more saturation tweaks, this was good to go. I do wish I made the glowing sections of the body more noticeable, but what can you do? This was a really, really fun evolution to add to the roster. Brinice, the Icy Touch Pokemon. Another fairly simple change for the redesign, but there's at least something to talk about with it. I fixed the lackluster proportions by making the Pokemon significantly wider as we get to the face. I also made it more 3D with more defined edges on the icy body. I made the eyes and mouth bigger with a brighter pink on the inside to really stand out against the gray smoke of the head. I added a small shadow behind the face to allude to the body hidden by the smoke. Plus, I just think it makes the Pokemon look cooler. Pun naturally intended. Graspical, the Freezing Hand Pokemon. Even I forgot how much I changed for this redesign. Alright, let's get cracking. First up, I made the blue of the icy body brighter to make the smoky appendages stand out a lot more. I made the smoke across the board flowier, for lack of a better descriptor, with more implied movement, if that helps. Added more black to the body to give the design some more depth. Added a hole on the palm just to break up the colors and for weird vibes, honestly. I gave the Pokemon more of a face and expression. I love the little mouth it has. It's so angry. I added some ice crystals on the lower body just to make it a little bit more interesting, and so the design wasn't so top-heavy. This was a really good update. Nothing special, but better. Tawniel, the Drilltail Pokemon. With the exception of some minor proportion changes, this is essentially a redraw to fix the perspective of the Drilltail. I made the head a smidge bigger to help balance out the top and bottom halves of this Pokemon. Also made the throat sac go a little bit higher on the body so it wasn't flush with the neck there. I thought I added a little bit more visual depth. Made the fins a little bit bigger. Now you can actually see the one in the back ever so slightly. But the drill itself is what got the bulk of the fixes, like in the perspective. I made it slightly bigger with more consistent angles and fixed the perspective on the spikes and the lines of the drill. Take a shot every time I say the word perspective in that paragraph. Naturally, I had to give this Pokemon drill point for the hidden ability. It was too perfect not to bring back here. Drill, the Spinning Blade Pokemon. Insert Loxton joke. Okay, now that we've gotten this out of the way, let's talk about the actual changes here. I gave this Pokemon more of an actual face upon feedback, so I added the eyebrow and had a cleaner separation of the jaw from the rest of the drill head. Plus the face needed a little splash of color, so the blue was a good choice to throw on there. I made the light blue of the body brighter, made the fins a lot bigger, and I made the body slightly thicker, but the real change once again came from the blade fin itself. This was a last-minute addition to the design to help it make more interesting silhouette upon feedback. Getting the perspective to look right with the notches took a few tries, but I eventually got it the most part. Blade itself was naturally the thing I spent the most time on, and I'd say it's overall a success. I did update the terrible shiny, replacing the dull gray with a stark black and moving the metallic blue around as the accent color. Flamejewel, the Serene Fire Pokemon. If you don't recall this Pokemon from the first version of this region, I said it was the worst Pokemon in the entire preserve at the time, and I still stand by that statement. I had just gotten over COVID when I drew this Pokemon originally, and it sucked. So I made it a personal mission to fix this Pokemon in the reboot, and this is a night and day difference. I gave it an actual proper 3/4 view as opposed to the boring profile view of the original. I fixed the positioning and the size of the eye to feel more natural to the body. I added the pattern along the side of the body to break up a lot of the empty space. I curved the fins more across the board, changing the top and bottom ones completely. I modeled said fins after angel wings, this Pokemon being based on the flame angelfish, if you don't recall. I swapped some of the colors around with the new additions in mind, and this is so much better. I'm actually happy to to look at this Pokemon instead of feeling crushing disappointment. Bahasian Seal, the Spirit Seal Pokemon. Okay, finally talking about these guys. Upon reflection for this script, this regional line was kinda disappointing in the OG Preserve, so I had to step up my game for the redesigns. I made this Pokemon a bit more chonky and made the head and body more connected without a clear line separation. There. I made the flippers bigger, fixing the perspective on the one on the back while I was at it. I removed the light blue and added the pale green across the board, including the new pattern on the side. The mustache and horn got a slight size increase as just to help the silhouette. The Mega Evolution I did for this line prior to the reboot of this region really came in handy to help influence the new redesigns for more visual cohesion. Bahasian Dugong, the Spectral Oil Pokemon. No exaggeration on my part when I say the original version of this Pokemon was lame. It was so undercooked, Gordon Ramsay would call it raw. And not the good kind. The Mega really helped the redesign of this Pokemon. One of the suggestions given to me during development was making the horn be on fire, so I modeled it after a candle wick. So I moved the flame from the stomach to the horn. The curl up front is supposed to look like old school candle holders. You'll see it on screen here if I do my job during the editing process right. I made the pose more dynamic since the originals was weak sauce. I wanted to allude to candle wax for the Pokemon, so the limbs and hair are goopy like melting wax. I thought that was a clever visual motif to keep the candle theme going. I made the ectoplasmic mustache more flame-like upon feedback, keeping the consistency between the ectoplasm sections of the body. I did change the shiny a bit, adding the white to the pre-existing shiny palette. I am just a lot happier with this Pokemon. Sawalis, the Sonar Whale Pokemon. The only baby Pokemon added to the preserve, this is the pre-evolved form of Kacharok. I had one mission with this Pokemon, make the most adorable sperm whale I could, and I succeeded in spades there. Kacharok didn't feel like a full evolutionary line in hindsight, so I added this little cutie to help expand the line, and add some sound types to the dex while I was at it. I tried to keep the patterns and colors between the evolutionary stages consistent, mainly with the wavy blue underbelly and the gray skin. Admittingly, there is nothing super special about this Pokemon, but it's so goddamn cute that I can overlook the lack of a secondary design concept to make it actually clever. Kacharok, the Armor Whale Pokemon. This unit evolves from Sawalis when it evolves while holding a King's Rock. The OG version sucked. I am so disappointed looking back at it now. It was just a whale with rock armor. Now, it's a much better designed whale with rock armor. I made this unit longer to resemble actual sperm whales better, and the fact the Pokemon just felt too small for my liking. Add the pattern along the stomach to be consistent with Sawalis and to break up a lot of the empty space on the body. I made the rock armor across the board more 3D looking, mainly with the helmet up front. The colors needed some work, so I made the blue darker for contrast, and I made the helmet a little bit more ornate with the color patterns. Said helmet was made bigger, if just to make the lower jaw seem more anatomically correct for a sperm whale Pokemon. I swapped out Strongjaw for harmonized play into the sound wave lore of this Pokemon. This and Cephaloshock now feel like proper deep sea monsters and rivals. Speaking of which, Cephaloshock, the electric squid Pokemon. A classic disappointment from the OG Preserve. Our resident evolution to Octillery still evolves via Thunderstone. This living railgun needed the update almost as much as Crabrate did, being one of the biggest duds of an evolution in the OG Preserve. Now, I am super happy with this Pokemon. First thing I did was reposition the Pokemon for a more dynamic pose, and to work off my reference photo for the railgun easier. That took the longest time out of the entire design process. I had to do so many tweaks and adjustments just to get it here. I made the main tentacles a lot thicker to feel more powerful. I almost completely redesigned the head, adding the 2 fins/horns on the side for some color balancing, and just to look overall just more badass. I completely retooled the color scheme, replacing the red with purple for more of a change between evolutionary stages. I relegated the red to select accent colors across the body. The shiny is still more or less the same. Another massive update for a lackluster Pokemon. I get the feeling if I made a drinking game out of this breakdown, people would die if I had y'all take a shot from me saying some variation of that. Drink responsibly. Gastor, the Iron Shell Pokemon. This Pokemon needed a major overhaul, and that's exactly what I gave it. Firstly, I gave the Pokemon a more defined face and jaw. Well, more like giving an actual jaw. I completely changed the eyes and made the eye stalks longer. I shrank the body a bit and made the shell a lot bigger, while changing the main color of the shell to black for a little bit more color contrast. I made the shell a little bit more 3D with clear defined sides and depth. I don't know the proper terminology to describe what I'm trying to say I did there, so bear with me. I reworked liquid metal as an ability since there was too much overlap with iron-rich diet from the Athnos region, so I lowered the health regain, but it gets a special defense buff when hit by a steel-type move. The silhouette is so much better now. Steelapod, the Iron Shell Pokemon. Not as many changes as Gastor, but no less impactful. I made the shell bigger once again, mainly by extending the back of it more while I smoothed it out for a little bit cleaner line work. The spikes are a lot bigger, and I slightly darkened the gray across the board there. I made the horned eyebrows bigger and just gave it a mustache and beard just to help the design feel a little bit more Pokemon-y and to break up the overwhelming negative space there. I widened the bottom of this Pokemon and made the lowest layer black as the shell for some more color balancing. A solid little update. I really love the shiny colors on the new design. The red really pops now. Takoyaki, the deadly delicacy Pokemon. I was looking to add some more food-based Pokemon to my catalog when this pun of a Pokemon entered my brain. I knew I had to add this Pokemon to the Dex immediately. I've seen a lot of good Takoyaki mons when I was doing research for this design, so I tried my best not to step on anyone's toes if I could help it. I went with Poison since I thought that would be the more interesting type, but I gave it Food Critic for the double dose of type coverage with Fairy and just how it fit thematically. The purple bits around the forehead and the tops of the tentacles are supposed to allude to the condiments drizzled over actual takoyaki. Plus, it helped break up the silhouette, so win-win. The colors came easy. Even they led to some Octorok jokes that went straight over my head. Never played a Zelda game, sue me. This was a fun little goober to work on. Aquivulus, the blank stare Pokemon. To say the first pass of this Pokemon was bad is a mastery of understatement. It was so boring, the mouth and the expression being the only saving graces of the design. So I decided to push my little idiot fish here. Not an insult, that's the species of fish this is actually based on. Firstly, I ballooned this Pokemon up a lot more for a more unique body plan compared to the original, making the fin a lot smaller for some comedic effect. I made the eyes bigger and made it a little bit more wall-eyed. I damn near completely overhauled the color scheme, making the fins a dark blue and the accents more of a pale seafoam? Let's go with seafoam. The shiny is more or less the same, some saturation differences for sure, with only the darker green being the only new addition there. Lauceon, the sea parasite Pokemon. This menace now evolves via Hive Stone. The getting hit by infestation was too specific to be a viable evolution method. I made the head and jaws a lot bigger so I had more room to show off the parasite living inside the mouth and just to look scarier. I whited out the eyes, really selling that this Pokemon is more or less dead, using the same shade of white for the ends of the fins, replacing the orange that was there originally. I made the dorsal and tail fins a lot bigger, though I changed the shape of the latter and curved it a little bit more for a better silhouette. I created Pester to help round off the elemental normalize abilities, and it was just too fun not to use. I'm really proud of the name for this one. I completely revamped the shiny, making black the primary color for the body and just working around it. The OG shiny was a train wreck. Gasandokuro, the Sandcastle Pokemon. This beachside terror is the evolved form of Palossand. It is based on the Gashaka Dokuro, a giant skeleton yokai. This is easily my favorite new evolution added to the preserve. When I learned about this yokai, I knew I wanted to do something with it, and after some thought, making an evolution for Palossand was too tempting to ignore. The first pass kind of nailed the overall look for the Pokemon. The only real major flaw was the flag at the top of the head just being too stiff. I did also have to rework the hand on the outstretched arm. It was a little too busy looking, so I had to simplify a lot of the details across the board with this Pokemon to be more in line with the rest of the evolutionary line. I rounded off the ribs on the torso, and the rest was good to go. The colors were easy, though the render took some time to get down, but that thankfully wasn't too difficult. If I had to substitute one member of my team to bring this in, I'd switch it with Fantank, but I just couldn't do it. Pyrangu, the Fire Simian Pokemon. This guy didn't change much, honestly, just fixing most of the lackluster line work from the OG version. The only major changes I did was adding ears to this Pokemon and changing the pupils to be more expressive. Oh, I did make the fur on the lower body a bit more jagged to break up the silhouette and feel a little bit more fiery. And the eye markings went from full-on circles just to a liner. No major reason, I just thought it made the face less crowded. All in all, this is more or less a redraw. Flame Manitan, the Fire Shaper Pokemon. The evolution here got more changes in the redesign compared to Pyrangu. First off the bat, I made this unit wider since orangutans are big old boys and the OG was too skinny. This mainly applies to the shoulders, since I moved the arm in front more to the right for more breathing room in the torso, and to make the Pokemon look even bigger. Speaking of bigger, the Flame Beard and the tool in its hands got a lot larger with a significantly better render, I might add. You can't clearly see it because of the beard, but I did add some of the light pink underneath there on the chest to break up the colors and fix some of the color balancing. Shiny-wise, I swapped out the orange with the light blue since I don't feel like it changed enough, and the pink accents were just getting lost in the shuffle. Nausicaan Centret, the Scout Pokemon. Not a whole lot of changes, but they're meaningful ones, so let's break them down, shall we? First off, I changed the eye colors from a soulless black to the light blue to contrast more with the orange of the body. I swapped the lighter brown accent to the off gold color just so it stood out more. The original was just getting lost in the shuffle, sadly. I made the little mud wings on the arms a bit longer, and finally I evened out the fur on the tail just before the drill starts. I didn't give it drill points. This is the only one in the line that has a drill as part of their body. Oh, I also removed the line art around the triangle pattern on the chest. I just felt that it helped declutter the torso. In hindsight, I probably should have changed the eye color on the shiny, but oh well. Nausicaan Furret, the long-bodied Pokemon. This one is more or less a redraw since the OG version wasn't too bad, outside of a few key weaknesses addressed here. I changed the eyes once again to something less creepy looking on this design. I simplified the patterns across the body, just making each section bigger so it didn't get too busy. Lastly, I made the excavator tail look a little bit more 3D to give it a sense of depth since the original felt very flat. Oh, I did make the dark sections of the body just full-on black since they felt a tad too muted in the original, so there was no contrast. The shiny is the same, should have changed the eye color again, moving on. Rabbit, the Tunnel Claw Pokemon. Now, this one changed the most out of the entire line. Let's start with the big one, the tail. I completely redesigned the fingers at the end, so when they form together, it can use it like a jackhammer, which the OG really couldn't. I also cut down on the number of fingers by one just to make it easier to form said hypothetical jackhammer. I made the body overall longer to flow easier with a more defined neck and back. I simplified the patterns once again and completely overhauled the color scheme. The colors easily took the longest time to balance out, giving me a headache more than once. I had to do minor touch-ups across the board so the color balance would work, but it was worth it. The shiny got reworked, mainly replacing the yellow accents with the dark blue and replacing the brown with black. A much more put-together design overall now. Mufane, the Stomach Gases Pokemon. Our next new addition here is based off of cows and the methane gases in their stomachs. This was a fun one to work on. Fairly simple all the way through, so no major hurdles to go over. The only thing I had to change design-wise in the base sketch was redoing the eyes. They felt too generic in the first pass, so I made this guy look more tired and droopy after some feedback. Oh, I also had to adjust the placements of some of the holes on the side of the body, but that was easy. Outside of some minor, and I do mean minor color correction on the hooves, the rest of the color palette was a breeze for this Pokemon. Its version exclusive counterpart is definitely the more dynamic of the two. Speaking of which, Kanga Rocket, the Rocket Jump Pokemon. This is an old concept I've had on the back burner for a while. Something I probably should have done in the Sindine region, but I digress. Originally, this was going to be a two-stage line where the mama would launch her Joey out of the pouch like a bottle rocket, but that changed over time during development. The overall look at this Pokemon was established pretty strongly in the first pass, but it looked way too boring and safe, so I had to push it further. The tail was a lot shorter then, and the pose was milquetoast bland. The pseudo spacesuit, however, remained intact throughout the entire design process. The next pass is all about giving a more dynamic pose. It was a lot closer to this one, giving it more of a Superman pose and making the tail a lot longer, even if it's still shorter than what we see here in the final product. But it was the next few passes that helped iron things out and get to where we are now. The custom ability was a suggestion that I tweaked slightly, just adding the recoil damage. This thing would have a signature move called Backburner, essentially being a fire-type U-turn. This was a pretty fun design to work on overall. Adolescor, the Impressionable Pokemon. One of the more unique Pokemon in the OG Preserve. This fell as the only one in the evolutionary line I say needed the redesign. Its two possible evolutions were solid as they were, only needing minor touch-ups. This one was a bit of a train wreck in certain areas, so I spent more time trying to fix it. The first and most obvious change was giving this Pokemon an actual neck, something the OG version didn't have in all of my infinite wisdom back then. I gave it more of a proper dinosaur body plan, changing the shape and the flow of the torso a bit. Shrank the tail, but made the legs longer to balance out the size of the head and the eggshell. I made an effort to really make the render of the egg yolk across the board look better since the originals was a little flat in that regard. I got rid of No Guard for the normal ability and replaced it with Shell Armor for obvious reasons. Dragov, the Love Dragon Pokemon. The high friendship evolution method still hasn't changed, gonna breeze past that. Most of the changes came down to the proportions and some minor design changes. I made the lower body bigger to contrast the bigger upper body of its counterpart. I made the arms smaller and changed the shape of the legs just to streamline the body. Speaking of streamlining, I simplified the patterns on the arms and legs since they were way too busy. I made the tail a bit longer and added the curve to the tail and head crest for a more interesting silhouette. I changed the shiny by replacing the orange with the light blue we see here. Drakrid, the Rage Dragon Pokemon. Our angsty Dragon Boy's Evo method still hasn't changed, still evolves with the lowest possible friendship. I guess that'd just be hatred at that point, but I don't know if that's the actual term in game. I shrank the tail by a wide margin, being way too long for its own good. I simplified the pattern on the tail spikes, they weren't needed in all honesty. I reworked the color scheme a bit, mainly just adding more orange across the body. Oh, said orange coloration got tweaked just to be a little bit brighter, the original wasn't popping enough as an accent color. I made the arms bigger and removed the purple around the bicep just to streamline the colors a bit. Not as many changes as its counterpart, but a nice update all the same. Saddle Spike, the Spike Worm Pokemon. Okay, this guy needed a lot of tweaks since the OG was just so amateurish. I know I was an amateur compared to where I am now, but I still could have done this way better back then. I squished the body by a tad, making it smaller and more compact. I made the saddle around the torso thicker and completely covered the midsection of the body for simplicity. I removed the light purple from the color scheme since it blended in too much and replaced it with the deep red here. I made the flesh nubs thicker all around and made the spikes thicker across the board. I removed the spikes from the legs since they just cluttered the design too much. I completely changed the shiny, removing every single color from the original except for the yellow accent. Toxcoon, the Toxic Shell Pokemon. This one. Looking back at the original hurts me now. How did I fumble such a simple design this badly? First thing I did was fix the face, spreading out the eyes and making them the same size unlike the original version. Next, I fixed the perspective on the entire cocoon, moving the dividing line further down so there was more room for the face. I made the horns at the top and bottom a lot bigger with a more noticeable inward curve. I redid the color scheme, replacing the brown of the OG with the maroon, and swapped the pinkish red with the current purple. I slapped on a next texture across the board, and the design was done. The shiny also got a complete overhaul, but I don't want to talk about that right now. Venudos, the Slumberwing Pokemon. Okay, this is an interesting development. When I was going over the preserve, I realized I didn't have a flying taxi Pokemon, and I just didn't want to reuse a pre-existing one. So I decided to turn this one into the ride Pokemon and ran with it from there. However, this Pokemon only serves as a taxi during the night. It dropped the taxi at sunrise and then go sleepy. I brought back Dream Dust to better fit the new lore of this Pokemon, also changing the name and classification while I was at it. So I made the front limbs and torso a lot bigger to help carry the taxi. I made the wings a lot bigger with a more elaborate pattern to deter predators. I gave it more of a visible thorax since I thought that made for a more interesting body plan. I did have to tone down on the patterns at some point. Not a whole lot, mind you. The colors and saturation took me the longest time to iron out, most of them being too bright and just blending together. I'm a lot happier with the direction I took this Pokemon, giving it some actual lore to work off of. Why Mycia, the Funky Rat Pokemon. We got back-to-back new evolutions for John Rat here. This funky rat evolves from John Rat once it's exposed to a combat stone and is naturally based on a disco. I had so much fun with these evolutions. They were a blast. This was more or less perfect from jump. The only thing missing was the sparkle studs across the body to break up the colors in the empty space. I did have to space out the disco ball a little bit more from the tail since they were a tad too close in the initial sketch. Sad disco ball is my favorite part of the design. It brought together everything so nicely. The gradient added to it really helped sell the entire look. The afro was also a delight to draw and render. Never underestimate the power of the afro. The name was a brilliant suggestion and play on the popular song YMCA. I'll never do that again, I promise. Anyway, this was so peak, I had to use it. Moushpit, the headbanger Pokemon. My personal favorite of the John Rat evolution so far, this headbanger evolves from John Rat via level up while holding a metal coat. Once again, this was almost perfect from jump. Ironically, I actually had to remove some of the details to give this more balance. I removed a row of spikes around the waist and 2 spikes from the forearms. I also made the muzzle simpler, removing a separation on there, so the face was just one color. Once that was done, the rest was super easy. I did briefly consider making the jacket blue like denim, but I saved that for the shiny and kept this boy leathered up in its natural form. I can take credit for this name. Kind of super proud of myself for coming up with that pun. Batricity, the Voltwing Pokemon. This little painted bat didn't change as much as I thought it did, mainly just adjusting the proportions and adding a few details here and there. I made the eyes and ears bigger to feel more adorable. I changed a few details on the face, like changing the muzzle to black and making the fangs smaller since the lightning bolt fangs didn't work on this small of a Pokemon. I made the fur across the body bigger and spikier overall while making the feet smaller and changing their shape while I was at it. Lastly, I made the wings bigger, giving them more of a curve and adding some more details on the inside of the membrane. Gave the shiny an update, making the fur a darker blue, replacing the gray with black, and swapping out the light yellow with a light orange. Chiroptera, the Thunderbat Pokemon. Still evolves via Thunderstone, moving on. The biggest change to the design was to the pose, giving it a much simpler one in all honesty. It barely changed at all. I only really decreased the amount of light blue on the inside of the wings and changed the shape of the feet. The shiny is more or less the same with the exception of swapping out the light blue with the current darker red. This was one of the simpler designs to begin with, so sorry there's not much to talk about with this redesign. Honestly, it just needed another pass before any major reworks. Sanfrezian Condoler, the Elevation Pokemon. The only new regional variant added to the preserve, this is based on the California Condor and their near extinction. After doing the Emelop reboot, I had an idea for this line and knew I had to bring them into this reboot. This was fairly easy to tweak design-wise, mainly just rounding off the fluffy feathers on the body, tweaking the shape of the hair on top of the head and the top of the beak, while changing the eye shape while I was at it. I brought back Hot Shot since it was a fun ability. Nothing more really to say there. I really like the shiny for this Pokemon. I think it's super clean. Sanfrezian Gift Frost, the Elevation Pokemon. Now this one changed a lot more from the source material compared to Condoler. I changed the pose so it wasn't mid-flight. I made the wings a bit longer lengthwise, but not so much with the width of the feathers. I got rid of the ice on top of the beak since California Condors don't have that little growth on top of their beaks like Andean Condors do. I gave it more floof around the neck going all the way down the back, and turned the top and the tail feathers into a spectral fire. I changed up the face pattern, adding that little bit of yellow eyeshadow to make things more unique and bring some of the yellow coloration from the California Condor's face. This is one of my favorite regional variants of one of my own Pokemon. Something I've made a point to do more of recently. But you'll see more of that when we eventually cover the 11th region here on the channel. Gekos, the Moss Lizard Pokemon. This little lizard got a pretty good buff in the redesign department. Once again, gave it more of a neck. I shortened the head by just a smidge, and actually gave the feet a sense of balance instead of just floating in the void like the original did. Speaking of legs, I also shrank them for a more proportional overall body. I made the moss cloak and tail bigger, more so the tail than the cloak. I moved some of the colors around for better contrast, and I simplified the moss pattern so it wasn't completely overpowering. Lastly, I changed the eye color to stand out against the rest of the color scheme. But the real change came with the evolution. Drakamo, the Hidden Dragon Pokemon. I slightly changed the evolution method with this Pokemon, swapping out the held item while leveling up from a Dragon Fang to a Dragon Scale. I don't use that item enough and wanted to mix things up. The first and most obvious change was making this Pokemon a quadruped. A lot of my Dragon Pokemon had that body plan of the original, so I wanted to mix things up with this one and keep it more consistent with its pre-evolution. I gave it a longer neck and reworked the head shape so it flowed better. Swapped out the color scheme, simplifying the hell out of it and adding more orange across the board. I made the moss cloak bigger once again and cut down on the number of brown splotches overall just for a less cluttered design. I made the mossy tail look more tiered and wild for a more interesting silhouette. Lastly, I swapped out the yellow eye for the blue for more consistency and contrast. I gave it premeditated for its new ability to give it more stab options and play into their nefarious nature more. The shiny got some new colors as well, mainly with the magenta replacing the reddish-orange of the original. This Pokemon retained its spot as the 4th member in my in-game team. Tadpunch, the Head Rush Pokemon. This feisty amphibian got a much-needed glow-up, so let's chat about it. I made the colors a lot more vibrant for starters, mainly with the red and purple accents. I made the training gear / fist a lot bigger for a better silhouette. The eyes got bigger and the mouth got smaller, so the face wasn't so crowded, but still felt cute enough for a first stage Pokemon. I reposed the tail for a more dynamic flow, and I made the tail fin a lot bigger. The shiny got updated as well, replacing the orange with the blue you see here, alongside replacing the red skin with the purple. This changed the least out of the entire line, the remaining 2 being damn near complete redesigns. Some more than others. Froxer, the Punching Bag Pokemon. This is almost a complete redesign, only keeping the basic color scheme and the bandages around the limbs. I tried to make the OG design work, but it just looked awkward. After some back and forth discussion, I decided to redesign this Pokemon to look like a punching bag to still be in line with the boxing theme. I firstly tried to have the throat sac be the punching bag, but that didn't work. So, based on a suggestion, I went with more of a rain frog build for this stage. The next pass was basically the final product with a few issues I had to iron out. The feet perspective and placement needed some adjustment, and the torso felt too empty, so I added the target on the stomach to fill up the empty space. Yes, this Pokemon would definitely have counter in its moveset. The changes to the shiny remain consistent on this Pokemon as well. Croakout, the Third Strike Pokemon. Now this got a complete rework, now evolving once it learns Feint Attack and plays into more cheating / underhanded boxers. I wasn't happy with the original design, so I wanted to give this a serious update, both in design and personality. With its new dark typing, I played up the evil expression and cocky pose. The first pass had the jaw and throat sac being separated, but I combined them to streamline the design after some feedback. I had to rework the posing on the arm to our right. The original was at an odd angle, so I had to fix it to be more consistent with the one on its left. Sorry, on our left. I added the bandages on the throat sac and the back of the gloves for some color balancing and to balance out some of the negative space. Naturally, I massively bulked up the upper body compared to the OG design, shrinking and redesigning the legs a bit so it better fit this new body plan. Just added some warts on the forearms just to break up the silhouette a tad and keep some of that original design element strong. Lastly, I added the red tip of the tongue to look more like a boxing glove. This is such a great design. Oh, I'm so happy I did this. Injected a new life to what was a mid-ass Pokemon originally. Bouldering, the Boomerang Pokemon. The fact I didn't do a Boomerang Pokemon twice in the Sindine region is a fuck-up of royal magnitude that I had to finally fix in this reboot. The rough sketch laid out a solid foundation for this Pokemon, only needing to adjust the proportions of the lower body and add some minor details. I made the legs a lot bigger in the next pass, adding the layered armor up front to make it look beefier to support its overall weight. I gave it a pseudo vest with a crocodile tooth necklace pattern on the torso, going full Crocodile Dundee. I promise to never do that again, I am so sorry. The colors took a minute to iron out. Had to tone down the saturation on the red since it was looking a touch too bright and kind of like Scizor. Huge power might be cringe, but it felt perfect for this Pokemon. I was happy to make this the newest and 5th member of my in-game team. I know, 2 members damn near back to back after that long-ass jump. Kaleidoscope, the magic mushroom Pokemon. Okay, I'll be real, I thought of the name first and based everything else around trying to make it work. I added the magic mushroom inspiration just before I started designing anything, if just to give myself something more to work off of design-wise. The first pass had this being a lot fatter with 2 mushrooms acting as the arms. The face was the only thing that stayed consistent throughout the entire design process. Originally, the patterns on the mushrooms were a lot more varied and busy, but I had to simplify that and focused on the body after some feedback. The next pass got us closer to where we are now, adding in the lankier body and longer neck, even if that pass had it looking a little broken. I removed the mushroom hands after discussing it and the fact it was just too close to Amoonguss. So I gave it actual hands and put the mushrooms on the palms so it slaps the shit out of people. I also made the main mushroom cap a lot bigger for more contrast. After that, it was pretty good to go. I wanted this Pokemon to feel like an old hippie walking around high as a kite. Had to give it effects 4 for the ability. An ability I actually forgot about before someone reminded me. Sawtile, the Buzzsaw Pokemon. While most of the changes came down to a perspective shift, I did play around with a few of the proportions. I made the arms and feet a lot bigger for starters, having the arms tucked in against the chest when it's rolled up. I have the feet leaning back into the air, showing off what I think is a reasonable-sized foot for this Pokemon to stand on when it's unfurled. I made this Pokemon closer to a 3/4 view. Probably could have pushed it further, but this is definitely a step in the right direction. I made the jaw sharper with more visible teeth just to make it feel more ferocious. I swapped out Sturdy for Sharpness. Naturally, that ability hadn't been introduced yet when I made this Preserve the first time, so it was the perfect new hidden ability. The shiny is still the same and is easily the best of the entire Preserve. Nactonian Stunky, the skunk Pokemon. This original variant got a few minor adjustments and one big one, so let's delve into them. I made the eyelids their own separate color so they stood out against the rest of the color scheme. I made the legs a touch thicker overall, but not by too much. I decreased the size of the curled fur on the back near the head by a lot, and made the tail overall a lot bigger. I made the curls on the tail more pronounced size-wise since I don't think I pushed it far enough in the first pass of this design. Not a whole lot more to say with this one. Actonian Skunting, the skunk Pokemon. Now this got a huge update in the form of the new tail and the perfume pompadour. I had the idea early on and it felt like it was a really fun one to explore, so I made the tail a lot smaller and had the aroma trail pick up the rest of the slack. I did have to simplify the shape of the gas hair. It was a little too wavy in places and it didn't flow as well as it should have. The rest was really easy. The only thing that took any real time, outside of the render, was getting the shadows and the perfume hair to look right. In hindsight, I probably should have had one of the ears be visible in the silhouette in the perfumador. I can't unsee it now. Good going, past me. My past fuck-ups aside, this was a great update. Deterrent, the explosive door Pokemon. Alright, the last brand new evolution introduced here in the reboot. This is the evolved form of male Durants after defeating 3 alpha Durants. I base this off of landmines, flat-headed ants, and suicide ants. I think this is a pretty damn good counterpart for Regent, being the more defensive of the 2 possible evolutions. This one was difficult to nail down. The head in particular was a massive pain in my ass. I tried for the longest time to have part of the face be visible underneath the landmine hat, but it just did not work, so I just had to take the L and move on there. These Pokemon are the guards for their hives, blocking intruders from entering the hive by plugging entrances with their heads. I think I could have done a better job on the render for the explosive sacs across the body, but I am overall very happy with this evolution. I've had this Pokemon on the docket for a while, so it was nice to finally finish off the Durant line with a bang. Watch, I say that now, but eventually I'll get the stupid idea to give this line a Prevo. Thundle, the Cloud Fur Pokemon. Not gonna waste a whole lot of time on this Pokemon, since this is basically a redraw with a few minor changes. Biggest change out the gate was fixing the pose on the back leg, now actually looking more anatomically correct. I made the waist a little slimmer since the OG looked just a little off. I made the black fur darker since the storm cloud sections of the body felt a little muted. Gave the face a little bit more defining features, mainly with the muzzle. The tail got bigger with a slightly bigger ball of storm clouds at the end. The shiny got a minor update, swapping out the pale yellow fur with the light orange for more contrast with the white and light blue. Simple update, but I'm happy now it'll resemble its Mega Evolution a lot better. Lil Furno, the Fire Petal Pokemon. Oh boy! Did I hate the OG version of this design. It was way too simplistic and it just looked awful. I gave this a complete redesign. I added the pseudo crown on the forehead to give this Pokemon more interesting shape language and help transition into the hair petals easier. I made the stem at the bottom for a better silhouette and give it more of a sense of balance. I changed the shape of the eyes, and that was about it in terms of the physical changes in the redesign. Color-wise, I added more red to the body with the crown and added the little bit of the gradients on the flower petals so it felt more like a natural transition. This is such a night and day difference in quality, oh my god. Hyriosa, the Burning Cure Pokemon. The Firestone evolutions remain the same. Moving on. This didn't change as much of its Prevo, but it also didn't need a major overhaul to be good. I added the crown shape at the top of the head to keep things consistent. I gave it an actual neck so the head wasn't awkwardly stuck on the body like with the OG. Changed the shape of the eyes slightly, made the petals in the back more consistent shape-wise with the hair. Lastly, I fixed the god-awful render of the flames. Oh, I also made the green of the body brighter on both stages of this Pokemon. Forgot to mention that with Lil Furno. Not a huge update, but a solid one. Feesnob, the Ground Royal Pokemon. So this is basically a redraw more than anything, so let's go over what actually got minor adjustments. I made the feet a bit bigger and changed the perspective on the front-facing foot to give it better balance. Made the torso a bit smaller and gave it an actual neck. so it had more breathing room. I swapped out the eye color to pink to stand out against the rest of the color scheme. I simplified the colors on the wings, removing the main blue of the body on them completely. Now, the biggest change came with the tail feathers, vastly increasing them in size. The gems across the tail feathers also got a major increase in size. Shiny-wise, I swapped out the off-white with the dark blue for the accent colors. Cannot wait to redraw the evolution when I begin the Zinnia reboot later this year. Terrazar, the Tunnel Lizard Pokemon. Again, more or less a redraw with some minor changes across the board. I made the mouth a little bit more pronounced in this version, helping with the overall silhouette and giving the face a little bit more definition. Lastly, I added spikes to the top or bottom of the tail to give it a little bit more of a menacing design. Shiny-wise, I swapped out the brown accent, the original, with the sand color here to stand out more. Skeleterra, the Ghost Tail Pokemon. I slightly changed the evolution method of this Pokemon. It now levels up after using Shed Tail in battle. Besides fixing the flow of the body, i.e. fixing the terrible line work, I made the skeletal sections of the body a bit more detailed. I made the vertebrae more anatomically correct with the small sections you could see of them. Made the skull a little bit more pronounced near the jaw so the silhouette was easier to read. I simplified the shed skin hood on its neck, removing the orange spots and adding the light brown accents along its back. Throughout the skeletal sections of the body, I added that stream of ectoplasmic energy. I made the ectoplasmic tail and eyebrows a lot wavier for a better look and silhouette. Lastly, I gave it more pronounced eyes versus the pure white pupil of the original. Shiny-wise, I made the body more of a vibrant pink and made the gradient a lot more pronounced so the colors popped more. Another Pokemon I briefly considered for my team. Siamese, the conjoined cat Pokemon. Once the name popped into my head, I had to bring this Pokemon to life. Naturally, this Pokemon is based on conjoined twins and Siamese cats. The first pass of this Pokemon was solid, but I played it too safe. The only major difference between the two was the mouth, so I needed to push the design further. Originally, they had the same exact color scheme, but I inversed one of them for a more interesting design after some feedback. I did eventually repose the Pokemon because someone pointed out it wasn't dynamic enough and the Pokemon itself didn't have enough personality. So I made one of the kittens more energetic and the other one more closed off. After repositioning them to give them more depth, this little bugger was complete. I love this Pokemon. One of my favorite new additions to the Preserve. I do have some ideas for a possible split evolution line for this Pokemon, but we'll see about that in the future. Forminx, the Formation Pokemon. Okay, the only other Convergent Pokemon in the Preserve. I did what I always do when I have too many regional variants and turn at least one of them into a Convergent Pokemon. I know this is hypocritical as hell since I added a regional variant, but we're just gonna skip right past that. In terms of the design, I made the antenna on the leader of the troop a lot bigger and swapped out the green mohawk for a crown. I also gave that one an additional set of eyes to feel more insect-like. I made the red brighter overall, and that's about it. I swapped out the purple and the shiny for the bright pink. I also made the eye and accent colors as a nice light blue. I thought that popped nicely. Valant, the Anthill Pokemon. This Pokemon now evolves when Forminx was exposed to a Hive Stone. Gotta put in the work if I'm gonna make up a new Evo Stone. In terms of changes, I just fixed what was already there. I fixed the overall perspective issues of the overlapping shields and the spikes jutting out periodically. I added the additional eyes to the central face, gave it the crown, while adding the light blue gem on there to make it feel a little bit more royal, like a queen ant. Lastly, I made the top of the anthill more pronounced with the top of the Forminx head visible. Any color changes I did with Forminx apply here as well. This is just an alright design. Nothing special. Bunyabong, the Bog Beast Pokemon. Another missed opportunity from the Sindine region. This monster is based on one of their more popular cryptids, the Bunyip. Generally described as either a giant aquatic animal or reptile, I struggled a bit with this Pokemon. I knew I wanted to do a mammalian dragon type for this Pokemon to be more unique compared to the rest of my catalog, so this reads more as a water type than a dragon type, admittingly. The first pass wasn't too far off from the final product, but the proportions were lacking. I did try having the fur look like scales in certain sections of the body, but it got too busy visually quick, so that had to get scrapped. The next pass got the proportions where I wanted them, mainly just beefing up the upper body. I did initially call this Pokemon Bogyip, but I wasn't feeling it until I did some research and came across the word Billabong, which is an Australian term for a body of stagnant water. The name came easy after that. This and bouldering really should have been in the Sindine region from jump, but I'm glad I got to finally fix that fuck up. Ice Parroter, the frozen berry Pokemon. Our icy lizard here got a lot of proportion changes overall. Made the back legs bigger for one, changing the shape of the feet while I was at it to give this Pokemon more stability. I also made the legs just thicker overall. I made the head a touch bigger while giving it a slightly longer neck, just for some more breathing room on the torso. The tail stayed about the same length, but it is thicker near the base. I made the Aspear berries frozen to its tail bigger since they kind of got lost in the shuffle of the OG design. I essentially flipped the pattern on this Pokemon for some color balancing. I also moved the shiny colors around so the dark blue was the primary color instead of the accent. I replaced Slush Rush with Sub-Zero since I wanted to make more use of my own custom abilities, and I haven't used that one in a while. Sub-Zero, if you don't recall, is the Frostbite equivalent of Flame Body. Chinchil, the Snowsuit Pokemon. Oh, I forgot about this little cutie's redesign. This was a fun one to work on. I wanted to make it cuter and do something a bit different, so I had the Snowball get bigger and cover more of the body. I gave it a more defined face, especially with the ears and the eyes. I changed the feet shape to better support itself, and I thickened up the tail while removing the ice at the end. I made the dark blue of the body even darker, since, say it with me now, it didn't have enough contrast. The shiny is basically the same, I just changed the accent color to purple. This is still the cutest Pokemon in the Preserve. I didn't state it in the Dex entries, but this line does come from the Amalop region. Cinchilla, the Thermal Fur Pokemon. The evolution method of this Pokemon got an update, now requiring Chinchilla to use Overheat 5 times in battle. The biggest change came from the pose, since the originals was so damn boring. Once again, I changed the shape of the feet. Still not sure about the perspective in this pose, if I'm being honest there. Added more red to the design since I thought the color scheme wasn't interesting enough. I made the tail a bit smaller, but thicker near the end, changing the shape of the orange tip while I was at it. I changed a lot of the color scheme around, mainly just adding a lot more orange. If I'm being honest, this is probably the weaker design of the evolutionary line, if I'm being honest, in hindsight. Nactonian Purloin, the Devious Pokemon. Another damn near redraw. This fluffy kitty didn't have any major adjustments done to it. In terms of minor changes, I made the butt fur spikier for a better silhouette and to make it stand out more compared to normal Purloin. The very same reason I added the tuft of hair to the top of the head, and I apparently really like that design motif upon looking at my catalog. I did update the shiny, replacing the dull blue with the current brown. I gave this line Savage Snow to use more of my own abilities, and it was a fun one that I haven't used in a minute. Nactonian Liepard, the Cruel Pokemon. First things first, I made the whiskers on the face no longer made of ice, so the tail was the focal point of the design. I made the fur across the body spikier for a better silhouette once again. I made the tail a lot thicker and added the dark blue spot at the end. While I was at it, the ice blade on said tail was made wider as well to be a more intimidating weapon. Color-wise, I replaced the black spots with gray, darkened the light blue fur by a few shades, and made the darker blue accents even darker. The shiny changes from Purloin remained the same, just making the spots across the body black. Less of a straight-up redraw like Purloin. I already thought these two were quality regionals, and this just makes it even better. Poitril, the toxic puke Pokemon. Okay, these guys were on my radar early on when it came out to ironing out which Pokemon needed a major redesign. Firstly, I had this Pokemon standing up instead of laying down, just as a generally more interesting pose. I raised the wings upward to make it feel like a screaming toddler, also increasing them in size. I made the torso smaller and added more dark purple to the design, now covering the head, neck, and tail feathers. And lastly, I made the shiny look more radioactive, for lack of a better description. Petrarctic, the toxic ice Pokemon. Okay, the male evolution here definitely needed the update more than the female counterpart. I gave it much bigger legs and slightly reposed the Pokemon, bringing its head up more and looking more pissed off. I changed the wing shape to be more in line with other bird Pokemon, since the original shapes just didn't look good. I simplified the color scheme a bit, removing one of the accent colors since it really didn't add anything. Now for the big changes. The poisonous ice. I gave that a complete redesign, showing off the body parts underneath the frozen armor. In hindsight, the toxic ice could have been a bit brighter so it didn't blend into the body as much as it does now. Once again, I completely overhauled the shiny, making it more in line with Poitril. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a hell of a lot better now. Petrariel, the poison beak Pokemon. Comparatively, the female evolution here barely needed any updates to make it better, but it did need some changes, don't get me wrong. I fixed the leg perspective first, giving it more of a balanced pose. I outstretched the back wing, a classic for bird Pokemon. I changed the shape of the tail feathers completely. As for the colors, I made the main purple accent a lot more vibrant to be eye-catching and feel a little bit more toxic. These shiny changes are in line with the rest of the evolutionary line, so I won't go over that much here. This is definitely an improvement over the original. Samunada, the dragon eel Pokemon. We got more kaijus, baby! This stage of the line is based on the sea dragon itself, Monda, and ribbon eels. The first pass of this design was fucking awful. It wasn't poorly designed, it was just a fucking dragon. No clever play on the formula or secondary concept, just a damn dragon. It wasn't until some feedback that the ribbon eel came into play. This massive shift was exactly what I needed for this line. The next pass is essentially the design you see before you, just with slightly different colors. I went with teal for the main body color after some feedback, the original green looking more like a water dragon type in hindsight. I created solar radiation to play off of Tiamat's abilities and GXK, plus I don't do enough sun-based abilities, so I wanted to fix that. The name is a combo of Samui and Unagi, which is cold and eel respectively in Japanese, with Monda at the very end. Very grateful for the name suggestion I got. It fit the Pokemon perfectly. Okiotia, the dragon eel Pokemon. Probably still fucking up how I wanted to pronounce that, but here we go. This big old sea noodle evolves from Samunada once exposed to a sunstone and is based on Tiamat from GXK. I fully leaned into the solar radiation motif, and I don't think I've ever used a sunstone prior to this Pokemon, so win-win. The initial sketch wasn't too far off from this one, but I made it too cramped when it came with the tail placement, so I stretched the body out a bit more for some breathing room. From there, it was pretty simple, But I did have to add the tiny sets of fins and spike at the end of the tail since it just felt a little barren in that section of the body. I really love this design, mainly the glowing pink sections across the body. I had a lot of fun rendering the glow on them. Did have some issues finding the right shade of green for the body, but it eventually worked out. The name came to me this time around from a combo of Okyo, which is Japanese for Arctic, and Tiamat. In hindsight, not sure the red was the way to go for the shiny. Otherwise, another peak Kaiju Fakemon line. Tardigrade, the survival suit Pokemon. This was a fun one I've been meaning to do for a long time. Everyone and their mother has done a Tardigrade, aka a water bear Pokemon, and I wanted to throw my hat into that ring. Since tardigrades are essentially unkillable in most environments, I wanted to play in that for the design. The first pass of this design got all the major elements down, but it needed some work. The eyes were originally closed in the OG pass, and the arms were too barren design-wise. The second pass got to where we are more or less, the only difference being that the blue spots across the body were going to be bubbles. I changed that on the final pass, and this little guy was born. I had the ability nailed down from jump, more or less. I love the gold shiny on this boy. I think it pops so much when compared to the normal color scheme. I am so happy I added this Pokemon. Cyclic, the blind Esper Pokemon. A damn near complete redesign. At least proportionally. All the major details from the OG versions are here, but the body plan is completely different. I made this Pokemon essentially a bowling pin body plan-wise. I made the lone bang of hair a lot thicker with a touch more detail on it. I completely changed the wing shape, adding the purple tip on the main feather for the other wing as well. I made the eyes bigger and I made the beak a little bit more pronounced. To say the original was one of the worst Pokemon I've ever designed is an understatement, so I am very, very happy with this redesign. Espline, the Mind Detector Pokemon. Another massive redesign, but not as drastic as Cyclic's. I changed the pose completely, giving it more of a meditative position. I covered the legs and feathers to allude to monk robes, and to fix the awful perspective the crossed legs had in the first place. I changed the pose of the wings just to make it a little bit better and give it more overall breathing room. The eyebrows and mustache got a bit bigger as well. I removed the red from the color scheme and replaced it with the dark blue. I simplified the tail feathers a tad, just removing one of the colors. I apparently really like dark blue in my color schemes. Naturally, since I changed the entire vibe of the Pokemon, I gave this Pokemon Levitate as its primary ability. The shiny got a major update, just making black the primary color. Athnosian Phantom, the Stump Pokemon. The final regional variant of the Preserve, and boy did I save the best for last. I made the tail longer and simplified the shape of the fiscal sections of the body. I drastically simplified the inside of the Pokemon as to balance out the design and the overall color scheme. I changed the lighting and shading on the face since it didn't work out as well as I'd like trying to keep the original. Now the big change came with the render of the fire. I realized I needed to push my game in that department, so I went with more of a Moltres look for the flames. It took a lot of work to get this to look right. The lighting had to be its own layer. Not every fire-type Pokemon in the future is going to have this style of flame, but I do endeavor to have more variety in my style of flames going forward. Athnosian Trevenant, the Elder Tree Pokemon. Oh, I've been waiting to talk about this one for a while. This is one of the best updates in the entire Preserve. I made the entire body a lot taller and skinnier for a more interesting body plan. The more simplified sections of the body remained the same from Phantom. I also made them thinner so the wooden sections covering the actual body looked bigger. The biggest change came with the torso, splitting it open like a tree hit by a lightning bolt, with flames now bellowing out of it. I think that part of the body has the best render in the entire Preserve. I changed up the color scheme, having the burnt sections of the body be drastically scaled down so they felt more impactful. I changed the pose of the arms for just a more drastic silhouette. I simplified the eye, just having it be a glowing red pupil. I am considering if I want to redesign Arburn to better match the rest of this line now. Either way, this is one of my favorite redesigns in the entire Preserve. Zinnobo, the Rainbow Scales Pokemon. Another Pokemon I've had on the docket for a minute now, this being based off of a Sunbeam Snake. I figured I wanted to do one once I learned about the species, so this was the perfect chance to do it. I went with normal electric since I thought that'd be the best type combo to play off of something with the light spectrum. I pretty much nailed the design the first time around, only needing to add the scale texture across the body to help break up the empty space. Though, I did have to simplify the color scheme by a tad, giving it repeat patterns with some of the colors. I did have the eyeliner be black initially, but I ended up changing it to blue to keep the color scheme more consistent. The render was fairly easy to nail down. In hindsight, I'm not sure Normalize was such a great move for this Pokemon's hidden ability. Luxenothon, the Rainbow Scales Pokemon. Like with the Prevo, the basic design was nailed down fairly early on, but my real struggle came with the color scheme. I did learn from my mistakes and tried to have the entire rainbow spectrum on the back. I had to tone down that shit immediately. I tried for a few times to get it to work before I settled on the back just being one half of the color spectrum and the shiny being its inverse. I had to do a different scale texture on this Pokemon since I wanted it to look glossy all the way, and I felt raised scales might have clashed with that look. The rendering process with the shading was a lot tougher this time around. It took me significantly longer to do. I came up with this Pokemon's name first when I was brainstorming Zinnobo's name at the time, just a little FYI there behind the scenes. A fairly good addition to the Preserve. Paradise, the tiny soldier Pokemon. Another redraw for the list. Barely anything needed to change for this Pokemon. I repositioned the front foot, I made the tail feathers a little bit more 3D, and overall just gave it a better render. I also made the darker gray accents more of a black. Naturally, I had to give this Pokemon sharpness for the hidden ability. Nothing else was better than that. Another shorter entry. Sorry, guys. Though, I think some of you might be begging for that at this point if you've watched the entire video so far. Kudos to you. Fastaslice, the Sword Feather Pokemon. Not a huge change in terms of the actual design, but now this actually has a good pose based on some feedback I got during development. I did shrink the tail feather sword by just a tad to make the new perspective work better for me. I showed off the actual wings instead of just having them be tucked in. I did have to recolor the legs for some color balancing. I did shrink the beak by a smidgen, but I made it a little bit more detailed to compensate for that fact. In terms of the shiny, I replaced the brown with the current blue and swapped out the red for a more vibrant orange. Rescuon, the search and rescue Pokemon. Besides the original version of Geistion, this is the evolution that has gotten the biggest redesign in one of my region reboots. The Evo method has changed slightly, now requiring a Dawn Stone while Eevee knows Helping Hand. I knew I wanted to make this Pokemon a giant ball of fluff and happiness. I made the tail and chest floof massively bigger to really sell the furball nature of this Pokemon. I swapped out the main color to orange to give it more of an identity of its own versus just being a bigger Eevee. I smoothed out the ear tufts on the top, making them more in line with the rest of the design. I got rid of the mark on the back for color balancing, and someone said it looked like I had shaved that area and I couldn't unsee it afterwards. I changed the eye color to pink just to make this Pokemon look cuter. Of the two evolution redesigns of the Preserve, this is the stronger of the two. Earleon, the Rapid Pokemon. Still a Combat Stone evolution, moving on. Making this more of a three-quarter view was the main goal of this redesign, since I thought the overall design was solid as is. I did so with ease, honestly. Not nearly as tough as I thought it would be, thankfully. I made the back legs a lot bigger to give this more of an identity and to play up the jackalope motif. I smoothed out the front legs a bit so the back legs felt more imposing. I made the eyes their own color since the all-black one wasn't doing it any favors, and I needed more color contrast. I made the tail a bit bigger, just because. The V pattern on the sides also got a bit bigger just to help break up the empty space. I gave this Pokemon footwork to play into the now larger lower body, and I just felt like bringing that ability back in general. The only thing that changed with the shiny is the eye color. Frillfrost, the eel shark Pokemon. Our living fossil here was another redraw in the end of the day. This didn't need to change much from a design perspective. The only major change, outside of adding textures, was making the icy color of the teeth and fins a more vibrant light blue. I also kinda changed the shape of the eye, making it more of an oval versus the original circular eyes. For the shiny, I changed the underbelly to purple. I thought it just made the salmon color pop more when contrasted against it. Sorry, this is basically a nothing burger of a breakdown. Anguilfrost, the living fossil Pokemon. Okay, that's better. I actually have something to talk about with this one. I gave a slight repost for this Pokemon, not by much, mind you. Just had to adjust the angle it was sitting at. The most obvious change from the original is the change of color of the fins across the board. I went with my tried and true dark blue accents. This is a drinking game at this point, since the original shade of blue felt too samey with the rest of the color palette. Like I said in the last stage, I made the icy sections of the body a brighter blue to help them stand out. I redesigned the eye and actually changed the color so it stood out more drastically. Added more details to the fin, mainly just the lines you see periodically. For the shiny, I made the fins a mild black instead of the light blue they were originally. I do remember this one giving me more trouble than I expected for what is essentially a redraw. Prudokid, the tiny spark Pokemon. Our little miss revived from the feather fossil got a solid update in the reboot. I made the legs a bit bigger to better support their weight, and the OGs just looked way too skinny. I shrank the arms? Wings? We'll go with wings. But I made the claw at the end bigger to compensate. I made the pupil a tad more detailed and added some small teeth popping out of its smug-ass grin. I slightly changed the shape of the head feathers, giving them more of a curve. But the big change came with the tail. I made it a lot longer for a more interesting body plan, and to feel a little bit closer to their inspiration, Troodontids. At one point, I did consider putting a face pattern on the tail to scare off predators, but it looked awful in execution. Only change to the shiny was making the skin more of a plum color. Trudabird, the Fireclaw Pokemon. Oh boy, did this little bastard get a glow-up. If you don't recall, I did not care for the original version of this Pokemon at all. If memory serves correctly, since I've long deleted the original script, this might have been the worst fossil in my catalog at the time. With the exception of the tail, the overall basis for this redesign was ironed out within the first two passes. I curved the feathers on the head more, giving them some actual depth to the head now. I made the legs bigger, added some details on them while I was at it. and I pumped up the volume on the sickle claws. I removed the eye pattern and turned that just to an eyebrow, and added more visible teeth to the snout. The Firetail was the suggestion I ended up going with since it sounded like a lot of fun, and it was, especially to render. I made the claws look a lot more superheated since having them just be a straight color wasn't doing it for me anymore. I made the feathers on the underbelly more jagged to break up the silhouette, and lastly, I swapped out competitive with opportunist to play into the scavenger nature these dinosaurs supposedly had. It is insane how much better this design is now. Tyground, the Mudstalker Pokemon. One of my favorite pseudo-legendaries in my catalog. Since this Pokemon was already peak, not biased in the slightest, whoever gave you that idea? I didn't have to do much to update this Pokemon. I made the head a little bit bigger for more Pokemon-y proportions, while giving the impression of it having a neck. I changed the patterns on the face a bit, just breaking it up into a pair of eyebrows. I changed the shape of the eyes and added the little things to the mouth. The tail got thickened up by a tad, and lastly, the legs got a smidge longer. With the shiny, I just changed the color of the eye to a light blue. Tarager, the ground cat Pokemon. This changed the least out of the entire line, only making a few changes here and there. I do wish I made this more of a 3/4 view. That was a mistake I didn't fix in the reboot. Let's get the colors out of the way first. I made the orange and brown darker by a few shades, give or take. I made the legs more defined since the OGs were on the wimpy side. I added the little things to the mouth, and I made the energy sections of the body a bit longer and with a more noticeable render. While this didn't change enough in hindsight, the final evolution more than makes up for it. Tygeneral, the royal cat Pokemon. Alright, the big kitty himself. Let's do this. I made the upper body a lot bigger for more varied proportions, shrinking the size of the back legs lengthwise but increasing them in bulk. I wanted this Pokemon to feel strong. I thickened up the tail since it was just too skinny, and I completely changed the shape of the fur at the end of the tail leading into the sword. Speaking of the sword, I completely changed it shape-wise, making it more of a saber than a straight sword. I changed some of the colors around, mainly on the face and the tail patterns for a better balance overall. The render on the energy sections is vastly improved, and said energy sections got thickened up so they actually read easier at a brief glance. With the shiny, I swapped the existing palette around with the black and white sections, essentially just swapping places. I felt like making this a white tiger for the shiny. A very good update in my opinion. This almost made the team, but I had another candidate in mind. Shroud, the survivalist Pokemon. I knew going into this region reboot that I wanted to add a second pseudo-legendary, since I haven't done 2 in 1 region in a hot minute. I decided to base it off of the Whooping Crane since I thought that would be a nice counterpart to the Tyground line. I had a lot of issues with this stage. I didn't have a secondary concept to work off of, and it took forever to find something viable for the rest of the line. The grass camouflage on the back was there from the first sketch, but this Pokemon was originally more squatty, with a grass flat top on its head. I went through a lot of passes with that pose and proportions, but it just didn't get me anywhere. I added the lily pad Casa hat since I thought it worked better as a silhouette and for camouflage purposes. Plus, it just looks cool. I'll talk more about the custom hidden ability in the next stage, but it does spoil the secondary typing for this line. This admittingly does have the weakest shiny of the line. Sentry, the security Pokemon. Now we're getting into an actual theme for the line, being based around security guards and the like. We're bringing in the sound type of this stage after teasing it with Battle Cry in the last stage. This changed very little from the base sketch, only really needing to make the head bigger, the beak and legs a touch smaller, and curving the blades of grass around the collar. I thought keeping that part of the previous stage as camouflage for this line would be a nice transition going into the final evolution. This did have a badge logo on the forehead at one point, but it was getting too busy, so I scrapped it for this stage. Part of me is still iffy on the badge on the wing, but I do think it ties it all together nicely and it helps the color balance. This is just a solid little burb all around. Bruce Warden, the Guard Pokemon. The final evolution of the line, and the last new Pokemon added to the Preserve. Until the inevitable DLC. This changed a fair bit in the proportion department during development. First pass of this design was flawed in that everything was too proportionally the same, so I shrank the wings a bit and I made the neck and legs a lot longer for more contrast. This did have the grass collar at one point, but I did get rid of it after some feedback, so it didn't feel as samey as Grew Century. I added the handcuff pattern on the legs to break up the colors, and because it just felt a little barren at the time. Color-wise, this originally had more brown on the design, mainly with the wing tips, but I had to cut that down. I brought back the badge on the hat since there was more room on this Pokemon without the green, and it helped to make it feel more like a final evolution. I'm glad I added this Pokemon to the Preserve, and to my team as its final member. Regimind, the Enlightenment Pokemon. I cannot begin to express how much of a pain in the ass this design was during the redesign process. I went through so many passes and headaches with this Pokemon, more than the other two Reggies combined. I was dead set on keeping the Renaissance and the Vitruvian Man inspirations intact, despite it being hard to tell at a glance. One thing that was consistent amongst most of the passes was getting rid of the crystals for a simpler design. At one point, I gave this Pokemon a floating head with the Vitruvian Man symbol to try and make it clearer, but it looked awful. Then I tried making it the Crystal Ball a floating head. Then I tried bringing back the crystals and making them the limbs. I was getting frustrated and had too many cooks in the kitchen trying to help. I took a break, but eventually I stuck to my guns and settled on this design. Despite the hell this gave me, I am happy about it. The conjoined arms and tentacle legs I feel get as close as I possibly could to the Vitruvian Man. I love the energy body with the crystal ball core. I updated Boundless Mind since I forgot Psychic Surge existed. The shiny got a complete rework, making the colors a lot brighter. If I never see this Pokemon again, however, it'll be too soon. Despite that, this is a great redesign. Regiwar, the War Titan Pokemon. By a wide margin, this was the easiest of the Reggies to redesign. I made the legs a lot smaller in this pass so that the upper body felt even more powerful. I wanted to play around with different perspectives, so that's why I had one of the hammers facing the camera and the player. I added the light orange for the body to help break up the colors a little bit more. I added the fur pelt around the lower body for some color balancing and to help balance out the top and bottom halves in terms of detailing. I changed the feet and legs to be thicker, now having the metal shoes at the bottom. I made the mane of hair a bit longer for a more interesting silhouette. Same reason I broke off one of its horns. The shiny got a big update. I made the yellow accents into bright gold here. Say it with me now. I gave it dark blue accents! Very good. I updated Warzone to be more specific about what it does, adding on the accuracy buff on top just to give it a little bit more punch. Regivoid, the Black Hole Pokemon. The new pose and design is based on a sketch sent to me while I was working on the other Legendaries at the time. I loved the idea of having the arms be constantly rotating and the gravitational pull of the black hole center. The difference in their sketch and mine are the arms. I wanted them to be different, so I had one of them be a blunt instrument of pain, more or less, with the end just being an off-brand Saturn. Speaking of which, the rings on that one gave me some issues when I was doing the perspective, but I eventually got it less terrible. The colors took a minute to balance out, both in placement and saturation, since the OG's palette was too damn muted. The only issue I have with the render is sadly on the black hole. I think I overdid it, mainly with the glowing lines. I used the wrong brush in hindsight. The rest of the texturing and rendering wasn't too hard. The shiny got a complete rework from top to bottom. Every single color is different. I buffed up Dark Abyss by adding the accuracy drop for fairy types, and I wanted to give it more uniqueness when compared to Dark Aura. These three redesigns gave me more trouble than I was expecting, but the final product slapped. Frozelworm, the Chilling Toxin Pokemon. The pose was the first thing I needed to address in the reboot. The originals was way too static and lacked any sense of balance. Honestly, the colors took the longest time to nail down saturation-wise. It was hell. The redesign itself wasn't too hard. The only thing I added was some more details to the spikes and the underbelly. Color-wise, I made everything a lot more vibrant, and I replaced the light purple accents with pink, so we had some actual contrast in this palette. I made the lower jaw a bit bigger, I simplified the eye patterns, and I redesigned the paws and claws. The stinger was also made a little thicker, just some details thrown on top of that as well. Fun fact, this is the first fakemon I started using watercolors on when it came to shading. The shiny got an overhaul, making it a stark white and blue-green. It's better than I make it out to be. I swapped out Blight with Contaminate since I thought it was a more interesting ability for a legendary to have. Neverfly, the Cosmos Wing Pokemon. To call this the most disappointing legendary of the Preserve in the OG version would be a mastery of understatement. The original sucked. No beating around the bush. For the redesign, I made the antenna a lot longer and the abdomen a lot bigger, fixing the trash perspective of that as well. The first pass of the sketch had more wild-looking wings and teeny tiny little legs. I changed the shape of the wings after a suggestion I got to better resemble the actual butterfly nebula this is based off of. I gave the Pokemon long arms compared to tiny legs. I changed the shape and pattern of the wings. For the color scheme, I removed a lot of the orange and made it just more of an accent color. I made the wings primarily blue and pink, recoloring the line work of the wings to make them look more like pure energy. Initially, the body and accents were going to be white, but I changed them to the purple you see here after some work. Lastly, I added the stars glowing in the wings to really help sell the space theming and help break up the colors. I changed the shiny to better match the other color visible within the deep space photos of the nebula. I brought back Glitter Scale from Moth Royal, which seemed fitting for this Pokemon. Sir Planet, the World Serpent Pokemon. While this is more of a redraw compared to the other two of the trio, called the Apex Trio, I forgot to mention that, I did change a few things. The biggest changes came to the perspective and pose of the tail, and the shackles across the body. I changed the tail since the pose wasn't interesting enough, and I know showcasing the end of the tail more would lead to a better silhouette. Oh, before I talk about the shackles, I did make the beard a bit bigger on this Pokemon. Just didn't want to forget about that. The shackles were a suggestion to help the silhouette be more interesting. I'm glad I did this. It gives the Pokemon more visual storytelling and a more interesting design overall. I changed the blue on the body to a lighter shade for better color contrast with the green. I brought back Dragon Slayer for the ability since I want to use that ability more overall, and this felt fitting for a legendary. The shiny remains the same, easily my favorite out of the legendaries and potentially the entire preserve. That one still flip-flops. This was an undertaking. Really glad I took July off to work on this monster alongside my special project. This is probably my favorite region reboot so far, since I fixed a lot of the worst mons in my catalog introduced in the original version. I had a lot of ideas for Pokemon I could have added in this preserve, but it was getting bloated, so I moved them to a future DLC expansion. Down below, let me know what your team would be and if it changed from the OG version of the preserve. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's video. Hit the bell to stay up to date for all future videos. Let me know if you like this new way of handling region reboots. Next time, we do something special as I start a new potential series on the channel while staying on brand. I combine two of my favorite video game franchises as we start the Fakemon special series by making the Horsemen from Darksiders into legendary Pokemon. This is Austin, signing out.